Welcome to Joy Kills Podcast, where through the next 6 weeks, we will bring to you a woman by the name of Fallon who will express and share her terrifying and definitely paranormal moments throughout her life. Today, we will focus on a cemetery, a theater, and a voice recorder that left her and her mother speechless and terrified. So sit on back and enjoy part 1 of the paranormal. Welcome to the Joy Kill Podcast, where we have with us tonight a woman that goes by the name of Fallon, who will be telling us 13 experiences of the paranormal that she has undergone throughout her life. Today, we will tell you about the graveyard, a theater, and a voice recorder that went terribly wrong. Let me allow her to introduce herself, and then she can start with the graveyard.
Let me begin by saying that what I'm about to tell you is personal experience. It is not to be proven by facts or evidence. It is just my own personal experience, which I will share with you. When I was a little girl, my mother said that I was born with silver eyes. And a woman had once said to her that my silver eyes meant that I had what some people would call a sixth sense, which was something I would find out later my mother also possessed. And with us, when it came to a sixth sense, it pretty much meant that we could see things that others could not. Some would call them ghosts, specters, the dead. But when you're little, you don't really know what to believe. And over the course of my life, I've experienced many things at many of the homes that I lived. And at one of the places I lived at, in Nazareth, Pennsylvania, my friends and I would walk past this graveyard late at night. And most nights when we would walk by the graveyard, nothing would happen. Of course, you'd always get an eerie feeling when you were surrounded by the dead, but this night was different. This night, when me and my friend were walking by the graveyard, we heard a snapping sound. And when we had looked in the direction of where the sound had come from, we didn't see anything at first, but the closer we looked, we started to see these dark shadows forming throughout the cemetery, wandering around. And the figures, what first seemed like just black shadows, started to form into shapes of what would look like people walking around. But their faces weren't really distinguishable, and you really couldn't tell each one apart. And at first we looked as if we were seeing it only for ourselves, but when we had looked at each other, we realized that we were both seeing the exact same thing. The dead were walking around the cemetery, and out of fear, we ran back to the house.
So was that the last thing that you experienced that night?
Yes, that was the last thing me and my friend both experienced that night.
Okay, so then did the theater experience happen before or after the cemetery event took place?
The theater experience happened after the graveyard experience.
Okay, so then let's start from the beginning of the theater experience that you went through.
So I went to a performing arts school between middle school and high school, and I was a part of the theater program. And it was Halloween that year, and my theater teacher had this idea that we would all sit around on the stage in a circle and we would tell ghost stories. Either ghost stories that we had heard from friends or family or around campfires, or even stories of true experiences. So we're all sitting around and we're all just telling ghost stories and having a good time. And I wasn't really one to share my experiences then because I was young and I thought people would think I was crazy or making it up. So I just kind of laughed at everybody else's stories and, enjoyed what they were telling. But then somewhere between probably halfway through what we were doing, halfway through our class, I started to see a figure up on the bleachers, which faces down towards the stage. And instead of it being a black figure, it was actually more like a white silhouette. And it seemed to me like it looked like a beautiful woman with a white, flowing dress ascending the stairs down towards where we were sitting. And during that time, I, quickly closed my eyes and said, no, you're just seeing things, it's not really there. But it hadn't gone away. So I turned to my one friend at the time who was sitting next to me, and I said, do you see that? Tell me, it's just me. And she looked over and she said, do you mean the woman? And I said, you can see her. And she's like, yeah, I can see her. And at this point, we were both kind of raising our voices, and everyone had stopped and was kind of listening to what we were talking about. And everybody looked toward the stairs. And at that moment, we realized that she had disappeared. But me and my friend had both sworn that we had seen her at the top ascending down to us. And at that moment, my theater teacher turned on the lights and said that was enough. And we never spoke of it again.
Could that have been possibly the same woman that you told me that your own mother got to see at the house that you once resided in Nazareth?
It could be, but there's no facts to prove that.
Going into your recording experience with the voice recorder, was it you that first experienced it, or was it your mother that started the experience that night?
It was my mother.
Please, go on to how it all went forth.
So, as I said, me and my mom both shared the sixth sense. My mom had told me many of her ghost experiences as well, along with her experiences with Ouija boards and tarot cards. And my mom had always been fascinated by the other side. Unlike me, I was more terrified. But she always wanted to contact the other side. And so, at the house we were living at, my mom had had a lot of her own experiences there, and so had I. But mine we will talk about later in a different podcast. But as for this experience, which is the voice recorder experience, my mom had this old cassette tape recorder. And she wanted to use it to try and do a EVP, which is an electric voice phenomenon. There was already a tape inside the cassette player, and when my mom had turned it on, it was nothing but static, even though on the outside of the tape, it had said it was supposed to be Halloween music. So we decided, since it was just static, we would use it to do the EVP. So my mom and I are both sitting on a couch in our upstairs living area, and we're asking the ghosts in the house questions. The normal typical questions such as, who are you? Why are you here? How did you die? And for a little while we weren't getting anything in response. But then after we continued to ask questions, we started to get responses such as, get out. You are not wanted here. You do not belong here. And this started to really freak the two of us out, because it wasn't a typical like female or male's voice that you would hear. It was almost like a growling sound as it was saying these words. And we were both upstairs alone while we were doing this EVP. And when I had looked over to the door that's at the top of the stairs, I saw a hand reaching out for the doorknob. And then the door slowly starting to open towards us. And my mom that night had claimed to see a woman in white. And she had claimed to see this woman before in our house, along with other ghosts. And then they were gone. And then the tape stopped. And the next day when we went back to re-listen to the tape and see if we had caught any of it, the tape went back to normal. And it was playing the Halloween music that it had. And so, of course, trying to debunk it, we listened to the entire tape to see if it was just, destroyed, and all of a sudden it was working again. And we listened to see if it said, get out, or you're not wanted here. But the Halloween tape never did that. It just had Halloween music and, screaming and ghost booing in the background. There was never a moment where it said, get out, or you're not wanted here.
Did you have another EVP experience that was almost like that one?
Honestly, I never really experimented with EVP that often. It was something more my mother was interested in. I had only really watched it in TV shows and movies and stuff like that. I didn't really know if it could be substantiated because, I'm a little bit of a skeptic myself, especially since a lot of my own experiences I've doubted over the years, though it's hard to doubt what you see with your own two eyes and feel. But so I really never experienced anything else with EVP personally, but I know others who have.
Like friends and colleagues, perhaps?
No, more just like my mother, who, like I said, was always fascinated with the other side. So I know that even after that evening, my mom had experimented with it once or twice more.
Okay. Well, then we thank you for joining us, Fallon, for our first segment out of this 6-part saga. And we hope to hear from part 2 and see what's left to be told.
Well, thank you for taking the time to my experiences.
Well, we thank you, Fallon, for coming out for part 1. And we hope to hear more from you in our second podcast in part 2 out of 6. And we hope that you all tune in for the rest of the Paranormal Experiences podcast. Thank you.